Here at Novara Media, we've covered Palestine Action extensively, from the proscription of the group under counter-terror law and the legal battles that followed, to the arrests of thousands of peaceful protesters for resisting the state's efforts to control their political speech by holding up mere words on signs. We've reported on every aspect of the government's clampdown on direct action. That also included the harrowing hunger strikes of Palestine Action prisoners last year, many of whom have spent more than a year in prison without having been found guilty of any crime. And we've given extensive coverage to the Filton Six as well. Those are 6 Palestine Action activists who were arrested in a counter-terror raid in 2024, following an action on an Elbit weapons research site in Bristol, and whose second trial was just concluded. 2 of them, Zoe Rogers and Jordan Devlin, were cleared of all charges, but 4 of them have been found guilty of criminal damage, with one also found guilty of grievous bodily harm. They'll be sentenced on the 12th of June, where the judge may sentence them as terrorists, meaning potentially longer sentences, a higher path of parole, and registration with counter-terror authorities for years after their release. It's only recently that we've been able to report the fact that the prosecution has alleged a terror connection in this case, with the judge having ordered that there would be no mention of it in front of the jury or in the media. That means that the jury found those 4 activists guilty of crimes under ordinary criminal law without ever knowing they could have potentially been transformed into a terror crime. There are 19 further Filton activists awaiting trial. It's those political prisoners, to many of those and their family, that are subject of a new documentary. Its title, Operation Recomply, is also the name of the counter-terror policing operation that led to the arrest of the 25 people. The documentary follows some of those prisoners, as well as their families, many of whom have gone to extraordinary lengths to publicise not only the case, but also the extreme lengths the state and the police have gone to silence dissent over a genocide in Gaza and Israeli weapons factories in the UK that materially supports it. One of those family members is Emma, the mother of the now convicted Leona Cameo, also known as Emily. This is from the film.
So on Wednesday, I saw that Emma, the mother of Ellie, had locked on in front of Parliament. And what that means is her arm was attached to a suitcase so that you can't be moved as easily. She had this beautiful picture of Ellie, and she was surrounded by all these cops, but she was so calm. And she was just reading like words. She had Zara's words, she had Cameron's words printed out.
I felt like the state had radicalised me. I was honest, upstanding citizen, never broken the law, and it's the authorities that have poisoned me. The way they've portrayed my daughter, what they've done to me. I'd been trying to see my own MP here in Swansea, who was very dismissive, very unhelpful. So I thought, you're going to go along to Parliament. And I thought, well, this is my moment. I just decided that I would do my own little protest.
You must be well proud of yourselves, counter-terror police, for imprisoning 18 people who let compassion override comfort. The streets are safe.
Kamran Ahmed is one of the Filton 25. Between October last year and January, Ahmed spent nearly 70 days on hunger strike, with owner Heba Moraisi striking for longer at 73 days. The hunger strike, in which 8 prisoners were repeatedly hospitalised, was carried out in protest at the conditions in which Ahmed and his Palestine Action prisoners were being held. In one part of Operation Recomply, Kamran Ahmed explains the philosophy behind his activism.
Time and time again we see that when someone's come to power and their actions are quite evil or sinister and everyone feels defeated, but of course one person that grew up in that time period felt that he could make the change or she could make the change, and then it turns into a bowling ball or a snowball that rolls down the hill and doesn't stop. That's all you really need, really. You need to get that momentum going. Your action could be one of the sparks that can create the flame to carry on, really, innit?
Operation Recomply is having its premiere at this Sunday Genesis Cinema in Mile End, London, from 5:15 p.m. Tickets are on sale now, and we'll include a link in the description. Early today, I was joined by Alex Grace, the filmmaker behind the documentary. I began by asking her about why she chose to make it.
I was just quite shocked when I learnt about the case of the Filton, and I felt that there was a lot to be said about it and a lot that people needed to know about in regards to the case. I guess I felt like there was a lot of information on social media, but it was very kind of bitty. And I felt like if you take all that information and you put it together in one storyline, in one film, and kind of, make it make sense and make it visually interesting, and then it becomes, it's a really powerful story that people need to know about.
Did you find anything out that you didn't already know about it, or was it a kind of a thread that you'd been pulling on throughout the entirety of the time that you'd seen the stories on social media?
I think I was continually shocked. The more I learned about the case, I mean, that's why I started to make the film. And then obviously, while I was making the film, I learned more about the case. I heard more from the families about the story, what they'd been through, about what the defendants were going through in prison, about this terrorism connection. So it was a continual process, I think, of being quite shocked and horrified by it.
So did you find that the families of the Filton prisoners were willing to speak with you? Did you find it difficult to win their trust at all, or was that a seamless procedure for you?
Before I decided to start making this film, I was already attending lots of the demonstrations and kind of making little films there, and I guess getting to know people. So I think at the point when I was introduced to the families, I was introduced to them as a person that could be trusted to tell the story in the right way, I think.
What was your experience then of meeting the families? What did you kind of learn about what they'd been through throughout the time since the incident up until now?
I was really struck by how close a lot of these families were and how supportive they were of their kind of loved ones that were in prison. And I was really struck to hear about their personal journeys of kind of going from being family members, being like the parents of someone, to being almost an activist in their own right, kind of campaigning and making speeches in public and going to demonstrations. I think a lot of these family members were taken out of their comfort zone via this, and they really rose to the challenge. But I was also struck by how impacted these families had been by things like the violent house raids and stuff. It wasn't only the defendants that were affected by that. They had one family had younger children handcuffed by the counter-terror police and stuff like that. So I was really affected by that.
And how did you fund this project to begin with?
That's a really interesting question. I didn't have. Yeah, I've basically been living off a very minimal income all year, doing the occasional kind of photography job. But it was, I didn't have any funding. I mean, it's just been me and a camera and a microphone. So in terms of that, I've not been kind of spending any money. It's just been kind of trying to get bits of money so that I can, live. Obviously, things became a little bit easier when I set up the fundraiser. I set up the fundraiser in, when was it? I think October or November, when I started to realize that I was going to have some rather large bills to pay that I didn't have the money to, to pay for, like legal fees and other people to come on board to help me finish the film.
On the subject of the legal kind of problems with regards to reporting on this, as we know all too well, engaging any reporting on Palestine action carries a lot of legal risk with it, much of it connected to obviously the counter-terror laws we've discussed already. How did you navigate this?
When I started making this film, Palestine Action were not a prescribed group. So I was kind of making a film about families that were, the Filton families that were affected by their own case. And obviously that's inherently linked to Palestine Action. It there was an interesting period, I guess, during summer. It was probably around this time last year, or maybe a bit later than this time. Where Palestine Action got prescribed, and everything felt really risky. For a long time, it wasn't this film. It wasn't it wasn't public that I was making the film. Nobody knew I was making it, other than the people that were involved in it. So it was only really when I set up the fundraiser that then I kind of went public a little bit, and people started to become aware that this film was being made. But it's only, I'd say, really recently now I'm kind of releasing it that people are a bit more interested.
And what would you like people who watch your film to take away from it?
You know what I would like to happen with the film? I'd really like it to reach outside of the movement and activist bubbles. And I think it has capacity to do that, because it's kind of it's a story, a people-led story, a human story about kind of ordinary people that have had their lives like blown apart by, you know, these events that have happened. So I think it has got the potential to reach outside of those bubbles. And the reason I would like it to do that is because I think, you know, it's something that impacts everybody in this country. If this can happen, if they can get away with using counter-terror laws in this way against activists who are essentially in court accused of criminal damage, like, everybody needs to know that this is happening, because it can have an impact on anybody who then gets caught within the criminal justice system, or, you know, the criminal injustice system as it's rapidly becoming.
Absolutely, 100%. The erosion of civil liberties and the kind of breaking down of liberal norms, it affects us all, 100%. Absolutely agree with you. Tell us when and where people at home can see the film as well.
The film is going to premiere on Sunday at Genesis in London at 5:30 p.m. So doors open at 5 p.m. and then the film will start at 5:30. So there's still some tickets available for that screening. So that'll be the big one. And then we're doing a little tour. I've got a few screenings arranged. There's a screening in Leicester on Friday evening. There's one in Manchester, but I think that's sold out now. So I've just posted another screening in Manchester on the 17th of June. And there's a screening at Liverpool, at Fact in Liverpool on the 8th of June. I hope I'm getting all these dates right. But all the information is I've set up a website, which is operationrecomply.uk. So all the information about screenings will be going up there. I'm currently organising screenings in Newcastle, Glasgow, Edinburgh. We're going to look at Leeds, Bristol. Yeah, I'm getting lots of emails about screenings. So hopefully we'll be going all over the place.
That was filmmaker Alex Gray speaking to me earlier today, whose documentary Operation Recomply premieres this Sunday in London. You'll find a link in the description. Now, a new report published by the Centre for Climate Justice at Queen Mary University London digs deep into the extent to which protesters are being turned into political prisoners by our courts, police and government. Called Britain's Political Prisoners and published in collaboration with Defend Our Juries, the report details the ways these three branches of the state are criminalising protest at an alarming rate. Now, this report is the first of its kind to look at every case so far of jailed protesters over the last 5 years. Looking at 286 cases involving climate and Palestine protests, the authors of the report identify 3 ways that the criminal justice system dishes out outrageous punishments to protesters, saying this: remand has been used indiscriminately and recklessly as the first line of attack. Contempt of court has been freely used as a mechanism to protect corporate interests, to remove legitimate defences and to circumvent criminal process. Judges have handed down exceptionally long sentences over a sustained period of time. They're not joking about those exceptionally long sentences, saying this: in 256 cases, we were able to record the period of remand detention and the sentences imposed. In those cases, the total amount of jail time added up to 136 years. The average imprisonment period was 28 weeks, more than 6 months. 1 in 3 protesters, 34%, were jailed for 6 months or more, and 1 in 5, that's 21%, were jailed for a period exceeding a year. And again, to think that these are, again, crimes of protest, crimes of civil disobedience. Again, as we talked about in the interview earlier, this removal of a bunch of civil liberties, this reneging on like liberal norms, this should scare everybody watching at home. The report does also go on to say this. The most common offence leading to imprisonment was the category of contempt of court, found in 40% of cases, reflecting a shift towards the use of civil legal mechanisms and circumventing the right to a jury trial before imprisonment. Conspiracy offences, found in 70% of cases, were also widely used, allowing the courts to preemptively punish protesters for offences that, in some cases, had not yet happened. Remand is used abundantly and recklessly. In 60% of cases, final sentences were more lenient than the time already spent in custody. Palestine solidarity protesters faced particularly harsh periods on remand, with 60% held over 6 months. This exceeds typical custody time limits, raising serious concerns about the disproportionate use of pre-trial detention. Dahlia, these are some scary statistics, aren't they?
I'm really grateful to the maker of that film and to also the academics at Queen Mary's for really looking into this. I think a lot of us have been feeling for a while, and now we kind of have a concrete case study to demonstrate that Britain is on a slippery slope towards authoritarianism. You know, we've been on the slope for a while, and the thing with the rise of authoritarianism is it happens very gradually and then it suddenly happens very quickly. Because what we're fundamentally seeing the breakdown of here is, you know, within a liberal kind of democracy, there are meant to be some guardrails that mean that there is a separation between government and the judiciary. Now, there are lots of valid reasons why we can say that a lot of those guardrails are insufficient and that the law has always been a kind of political vehicle. But what we are seeing right now is attempts to circumvent even those insufficient guardrails that have historically existed. We see this both in the case of, for example, in the abuse of remand, the abuse of things like contempt of court, where, you know, for example, one of the lawyers for one of the defendants in the Palestine Action case was found to be in contempt of court because, or the judge tried to find him in contempt of court for reminding the jury that they have a right to jury equity, which is entirely within their right and entirely conventional. But there is an abuse of contempt of court procedures to prevent him from informing the jury of their rights. We also see this in the expansion of an abuse of terror legislation, you know, where people who have not harmed a single person, do not believe in an ideology that involves harming a single person, have not planned to harm a single person, are being convicted and arrested and charged under terror legislation. And the thing about terror legislation is that, you know, we have a set of laws and a set of principles that protect people from the political abuse of the legal system or from the abuse of power by the legal system. We have fundamental rights that are supposed to protect people in the process, within legal processes, and terror legislation takes you completely out of that. So things that any other normal person who is being charged with a crime still has access to certain rights, but a lot of those go out of the window when the word terror comes into the room. So when you expand the remit of terror legislation, you're expanding the remit of people who are stripped of those fundamental rights. Something that is supposed to be a very exceptional and rare thing becomes more generalized throughout the judicial system. And I think it's really important to zoom out and see this story in conjunction with the first story that we talked about on the show, which is large-scale abandonment of young people. You know, as inequality deepens, as, you know, we have not just one lost generation, but lost generations who are losing their stake in society, we are likely to see an increase in things like social disorder, some of which will be articulated as political processes. And when we see the loosening of these kinds of judicial protections and the political weaponization of the legal system in this way, what that sends a message to me is that the way that the state is planning on dealing with the inevitable social disruption and disorder that is going to come out of our broken economy is going to be through punishment and criminalization. And that is particularly the case when you look at the fact that, contrary to popular belief, we actually have quite a privatized prison system in this country. There are a lot of people who make a lot of money from putting people in prison in this country. Actually, a higher proportion of our prison population are held in private prisons than in the US, and a lot of people don't know that. So when you see all those things in conjunction with one another, it becomes very clear that the kind of social issues and economic issues and political crises that are going to emerge out of deepening inequality, the response to that is going to be repression and violence. And this is why, we've had a lot of conversations on the left since Black Lives Matter about this question of prison abolition. And it's become a very out of fashion idea now. There's a sense of, you can't argue for prison abolition. You can't argue against policing because it alienates people. And you know what? I can concede that I'm sure that for a lot of people whose lives have not been touched by the prison system, the idea of abolishing prisons seems insane. And look, you don't have to call it abolition. You don't have to have a maximalist position on it. But we do have to get very real that the expansion of powers to criminalize in the context of economic and social crises is going to become an issue that the whole working class is going to be impacted by. And that if we're talking about minimizing the harm and fighting for the rights of working class people to have better for themselves, we are going to have to think about what our strategy is for a state that is expanding its policing and prison powers, and what we're going to do with the fact that a state is using criminalization to deal with social and economic issues, that it is the only response that the state has to these kinds of issues. So I can agree that maybe it's not good comms, maybe it's an unpopular political line, it's also real. Just because it's something that maybe a lot of people don't understand, and it sounds very abstract and sounds very strange. The fact is that as progressives, we need to be doing everything we can to make sure that the state does not have the power to politically criminalize people, because that is going to come for our economic justice movements. It's going to come for our climate breakdown movements. It's going to come for the movements that are really important to us. And it's going to be a very big risk to working class people going forward. How we talk about it and how we have it in policy, how we articulate it is one thing, but we can't pretend that this kind of the criminalization process is something that we should just not think about because it's difficult, because it is very clearly going to become, what's going to happen is that we're going to have generations of abandoned people, and the state is going to respond to that by putting them in prison, whether they are politically protesting or not. And it's going to have way expanded prison system and a way well expanded ability to criminalize because of what it is doing to groups like Palestine Action right now. And that's why this is a really important fight for anyone who wants us to have a different response to inequality. Maybe one that actually deals with the inequality rather than just, putting a plaster, a very violent plaster on the effects of it.